Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. However, today we're a bit more of a burn notice for Russian hackers. We're going to be talking all things cybersecurity, hacker threats, and what to do and not to do in the internet, and what the world of cyber warfare has been looking like in the past decade. And today with us, we have Jason Wills-Starin, who works for one of the most major American banks, and he's going to help us understand what hackers do, what they are, and what we can expect from them, especially those pesky ones from Russia, Iran, and North Korea.
I'm Jason Wills-Starin. I'm a cybersecurity architect, a senior cybersecurity architect for a major financial institution. And what I do, what my job typically is to take vulnerabilities and to turn them into solutions to protect us. I.e., I will take or find vulnerabilities that are out there in the wild or that have been recently found, and I will help to build strategies and solutions to protect against them, while at the same time just trying to build out something that's very robust to protect the organization as a whole, building policies and building other sorts of protections that can help defend against the things we don't know about yet.
Yeah, which is a very necessary thing in this day and age, but we'll get there. What inspired you to become a cybersecurity officer? So we're going to dig a little bit into your childhood here, I suppose.
In my childhood, I was not terribly wealthy, and was in the beginning of the internet days, and we had dial-up. And in the United States, we had something called long distance. And long distance could be 15 minutes down the road, and suddenly you're paying these extra fees. And my parents didn't want to pay for this. And some people in my community started figuring out ways that we didn't have to pay long distance. And this began the beginnings of basically thinking in ways that were more nefarious. I got in trouble. And my mother sent me to go live with my uncle, who was a programmer in the United States military. And he let me learn how to operate on mainframes and this sort of thing. And I got hooked then. 30 years later, this is where I am. This is where my career is. It's basically going, hey, how do we slow down or prevent people, much more sophisticated than I was as a child, from abusing the system or cheating the system or stealing from the system, while at the same time offering a platform that is relatively lower cost. Because if there's less theft, the translation then is that in the long run, it will be safer and easier and cheaper to use.
I mean, hey, that's a very inspirational storyline for every little boy or girl who's playing lots of video games in their bedroom and learning how to code, because you're essentially the good kind of hacker.
I will openly admit that my morals had to grow from what I was in childhood to where I am now, but it's an understanding of that matrix and getting that chance to be able to experiment with it.
Speaking of the people who don't understand that matrix, since you work at a financial institution and one in the US at that, what are the main cybersecurity threats currently that you are seeing or perceiving in this environment, or I would say in the past 2 years?
So I will openly admit that there are consumer threats. These are the kinds of threats where it's like somebody gets a fishy email or a fishy text message or something else, and it leads to them losing money or getting scammed.
If that's possible, actually, could you define the types of cybersecurity threats that are the most prevalent?
Sure. Consumer threats through phishing is one of them. Denial of service, which is where a large number of requests or a large number of things that seem like normal everyday traffic will be used to prevent access to that machine. Imagine that everybody who is using a computer is effectively in some sort of series of lines. And if a whole bunch of fake transactions come across, that's denial of service. Imagine a whole bunch of people jumping in line who have no intention of buying a ticket to the movie, and you can't get to the front of the line to buy your ticket. That's an example, just kind of a sort of a system there.
Or
There's phishing,
I guess
which is, oh, sorry, I apologize.
would the internet all over Ukraine absolutely failing to work on the day that Stalker 2 came out and every single household decided to download it work as denial of service?
Yes, that would arguably be a denial of service that was, in that particular case, a failure to plan, how shall we say, to build out redundancy. That's not necessarily a cyber attack. That's a whole bunch of people waiting a very, very long time for what I hope is to be a very, very good game. And the resources just not being there to support all that interest, if that makes sense.
So a naturally caused denial of service.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Everybody who was in line wanted it, but because everybody was in line, the systems were overwhelmed and nobody could buy tickets. Yes.
Gotcha. All right. What's the next threat?
Phishing and spear phishing, and this is in English it's spelled with a PH at the beginning, which I know is kind of crazy for difficulties here. This is when people are going to send you a message and they want you to click on a link, or they want you to call a phone number, or to do something with that email or that text message. And when you get it and you do something with it, they gain either information or power, i.e. whatever authentication that you have or logins you have to be able to do something horrible to somebody else. Others are exfiltration of data. This is where they get in through some other means or some sort of things, and they take that data out. Sometimes they're just trying to sell it. Sometimes they're trying to use it against your government. Sometimes they're trying to use it to prepare for things. And there are also other types of attacks where they are trying to ransom your system, where they will encrypt all of your data and then try to charge you money for it. Or sometimes they are just trying to get into your systems and your hardware to be able to use it, possibly for a DDoS attack against somebody else. We see this a lot with some Chinese hackers. They will take over large numbers of Internet of Things devices, and they will use those to attack other systems, typically with a DDoS attack. And those are the major ones. If we're going to sit over here, there's about 654 distinct types of attacks, but those are the major ones.
Gotcha. And then I'm interested in sort of how did the cybersecurity space change in the past 2 years, or in the past, I guess, since you've said 30 years later, so you've been in this field for 30 years. How has the field changed in the past decade? And I'm assuming, and this is an assumption, it intensified in the past 2.5 years, and it majorly involves financial institutions. So there are, I guess, two things in this question. What is your definition of the axis of evil, and how does it play into the cybersecurity threats that the United States and the West is facing today? And how did these security threats change and evolve in the past 2 or 3 years or so?
So the axis of evil in cybersecurity is a term coined to kind of describe the groups that seem to be allied against the West. And it's not just seem, we have evidence of it. Mm-hmm. Russia is one of the number one. The Russian Federation is one of the number one. They are a state sponsor of cyber terrorism as well as cyber attacks. North Korea has received a great deal of training and support from both China and Russia. Mm-hmm. China, of course. They run some of the APTs. They run one of the most severe series of APTs. They recently attacked U.S. telecom systems, that sort of thing. And then we actually have, to a lesser degree, Iran and a few other Middle Eastern countries, or not so much the countries as small groups or people within them. But I would say that the nation states are the big ones. Think North Korea, Russia, China, and to a lesser degree, Iran.
And what are the most prevalent cybersecurity threats coming from these countries into the West? And provided that we're talking financial institutions or you work at a financial institution, obviously those play a very large part in modern day cybersecurity threats, with Russia, North Korea, and Iran all being sanctioned and having a hard time with money, or rather liquidity of money.
So let me try to break this down to a certain degree. Russia is in a financial crunch, and they need funds for a variety of things. And in the US, there are a large number of citizens who have retired or otherwise have gotten to the end of their financial lifespan, and they have a large amount of currency in their banks. Mm-hmm. And groups like the Russian group Sandworm are going after them. They will do ransomware, they will do spear phishing. Sometimes they will call and say that they are this person's grandson or granddaughter and that they're in trouble and that they need $500 for bail money. The Russians are pulling in billions of US dollars a year with these sorts of activities. And then that money is turning right around to help maintain their economy. There are other types of attacks where they're trying to gain information. The profile of American weapons, the way American systems are manufactured, stealth coatings for things. These are sorts of things that are espionage related. Mm-hmm. So you've got individual groups that are doing espionage. You have other groups that are around disruption. If they can disrupt an order or they can redirect an order, then suddenly equipment doesn't show up. If they can compromise a politician by hacking into his phone and finding horrible pictures that he's taken or she has taken, they can then use compromat to blackmail that politician, and you might see that politician suddenly change their political views or at least their political stances in the short term and torpedo bills for support for Ukraine. I'm just saying under the circumstances, those are sort of like the big things, but in the financial institution, it's about stealing money. And people say, well, why does cybersecurity have to be so strong within a bank? Because, of course, that's where the money is. If they can attack the bank and the supply chain of the bank or banks, then they can get access to cash, convert that cash or transfer that cash, and then launder that cash into the system, or even use that cash locally to buy equipment for the war or this sort of thing, mm-hmm. and ship it to another location that is outside of American or Western sanctions, and then get it shipped in. It's a way to bypass sanctions, a way to pull in other types of pieces. And when you're talking about microchips that may cost $2.15 each, and they can order 200 of them, and before the person gets their monthly statement at the end of the month and identifies that they've been robbed of several $1,000s, they already have produced enough or gotten enough electronic chips to, say, make 200 Shahed drones. It's a very scary proposition.
It is. I'm actually curious, maybe for some of our viewers or listeners, when I went back to the United States a month ago, I obviously still have my US number and it's active while I'm here in Ukraine. I keep receiving these messages that basically say something along the lines of your USPS package has been delayed. Click this link to claim it because it's been stuck in a sorting center. Another popular one that I think I received yesterday was something about my student loans. I've never had student loans. And I keep receiving text messages like that basically at least once a week, and I've never gotten them before 2022. Would it be safe to say that these types of text messages are phishing attempts by Russian hackers to get into American bank accounts?
So about 70% of them are going to be state-sponsored actors who are doing these attacks. But not to be outdone, one of the things that can help bring income into these hacker groups is they sell tools that are called rats. And these tools allow people to pull together and do campaigns, and they can spend a small amount of Bitcoin, let's say, $40 or $120 to buy these rats. And now they're in business hacking you. So the UPS scan or the package scan problem is one way to attack. It is, you click on that link, now suddenly you have logged into your UPS account. They are going to basically try to convince you that you need this package or that the package needs to be paid for in some way, shape, or form. And they are going to try to redirect some of your packages and then sell them off on auction sites, or they are going to try to get you to pay for the shipping and handling of this supposed package. There are other systems that are like this, but it really boils down to, despite the fact that there are hundreds of programming languages out there that are used on a daily basis, the most effective way to hack someone is to use the language that they know and to talk to them on the phone and convince them to do something that they would not normally have done, to give them money or whatnot. It's a very old sort of way of doing things with this.
Yeah.
So yes.
And usually the
you can-
elderly fall the most for such scams because they tend to be less internet savvy. I'm very glad that you mentioned cryptocurrency earlier. What type of role does cryptocurrency play in the world of cyber warfare?
So the biggest issue is that it is an easy way to launder money. In the world of money laundering, a very, very short, very, very brief sort of concept here. It's all about placement, layering, and then harvesting. Placement, of course, being I'm going to take American currency and I'm going to buy cryptocurrency, and then I'm going to try to hide the source through layering of where it goes, and then harvest it by getting the thing that I want. Drugs, the purchase of equipment that would be banned by ITAR or other types of sanctions, the purchase of sex or other types of things from various folks, or other substances that I might be able to sell on the black market and make more money off of. I might be able to, for example, buy titanium from one location, sell it to another area through cryptocurrency, and be able to hide the fact that my final destination is going to be Russia or is going to be some other location.
So,
It really boils down to cryptocurrency has helped to bypass sanctions that would normally be stopped because they were in euros or dollars, because people are willing to accept them and the areas are not covered by the same risk framework or risk monitoring network that you would have on normal currency.
is there evidence or have you been witnessing any state-sponsored cybersecurity attacks, like, say, Russia onto the United States, especially recently?
Well, yes. And I do want to mention here Salt Typhoon, which is one of the 4 typhoon groups that the Chinese government has, is famous that they were finally caught after probably an 8-month attack into the telecom industries. 8 months, 8 different telecoms. They're using a tool called Ghost Spider. As far as Russia is concerned, they have a variety of APT groups that are called forests, and they have different kinds of attacks that are called forests. They've attacked Microsoft. They had a pretty famous one that started in November of 2023 last year, and that's gone on. That has also led to a variety of other attacks. including the Russian attack on the UK's NHS system, their national health system, which is believed to actually have caused deaths.
Really?
They stack these things on. They really do.
Yeah, that's awful to hear. I mean, especially when it costs people lives. Not that Russia cares about lives, and we can witness that within the present aggression and present invasion of Russia into Ukraine. I wonder, what are the main types of cybersecurity attacks? What types of institutions are affected the most, other than financial institutions? And I mean like government institutions or big pharmaceutical companies. Like, what are in the West today? What is the most critical to sort of defend, I suppose, from from cyber warfare?
Russia has been most interested in the last, I'd say, 6 years, that includes the war here, in attacking financial institutions, of course, like we said. But if we are looking for second tier, they're looking to attack governmental agencies and gather information on their political opponents, or find their political dissidents, i.e., they want to find the people who were spies or assets that gave critical information, and they want to unalive them. They want to kill them. And I have to stress that is one of those things where if you can't prove that you can protect assets, then how are you going to get assets in the future? How are you going to get people who are going to provide information about future attacks if you can't protect the people who helped you in the previous ones? They like attacking startups and cyber companies in California, Silicon Valley area. They like going after health companies right now because they tend to have been lax in their cybersecurity, and there's a lot of compromising information there. If they can find out about someone's, let's say, embarrassing medical condition, then they can attempt to do blackmail against that person. And we have seen incidents where people have been called up because they had received some medical test results that may have been compromising. And there were threats on the phone to tell their friends and family that they had this particular disease or they had this particular condition.
Oh, wow. Well, that sounds like middle school bullying, but, on a way larger scale. Since we started talking politics, there is a lot of rhetoric about election interference, especially in the United States and also in quite a few countries in Europe. Have there been any instances, or rather confirmed instances, to your knowledge, of election interference in the United States or the greater allies?
Yes. One of the big ones was Brexit. The idea is that populist movements on the right side of politics, and I'm not trying to get in and say one politic is better than the other, but populist movements on the right-hand side of politics, conservative politics, where you are afraid of someone, immigrants or something else along these sort of lines, can be amplified by effectively a DDoS of people's information. If these people are using Twitter or they are using Facebook or this sort of thing, a very small amount of money or time can be used to greatly amplify messages of fear. I know that in Ukraine, a group called Gamma Radon, which is a Russian hacker group, has been promoting a large number of messages about we can't win this war, or the thing's gone too far, or we need to just give up Crimea. These are messages that this group literally has 600 words that they keep using over and over and over again in English, Russian, and Ukrainian on different sorts of social media posts in order to amplify a message of a very small percentage. And we're seeing in the actual results and percentages here, people are repeating these words in the exact same order that they're reading them.
Yeah.
That is a social engineering attempt. Sorry, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, no, no. I was actually agreeing with you because as someone who works with social media and reads a lot of comments, I do see quite a few. I've seen a huge increase in bot attacks in a way where, so, as you said, a message gets taken, and for instance, there is this rhetoric in not in Ukraine, but Russia wants Ukrainian people to want to freeze the conflict and negotiate, right? So there have been bots writing messages under the guise of Ukrainian people saying, "Oh, we're tired of this. It's actually not that bad. It doesn't matter if we're under Russia or under Ukraine. It's just like time to end this war, and the war is only going to end in negotiation. We should just freeze the conflict. So let's have people stop dying, right?" And these messages get amplified, and they're obviously written by bots. But then you see a small percentage of everyday Ukrainians with like real accounts repeating those messages, and it's very clear that Russia has seen it in some small group of people somewhere and just amplified it, which is quite
One of the
scary.
one of the keys to social engineering is jingoism. And if people don't know what that word is or where that comes from, it's very, very common in propaganda to see a slogan or turned out of something that you would never have thought it to be. And the idea of seeing that slogan slowly repeated and replaced and turned into almost a song that people are hearing inside of their heads, it's getting into your mind that this is something that's acceptable, that
Yeah.
other people are believing in it.
In Russia, there is actually a saying. It goes something like this: repetition is the mother of learning. And that they really do. It sounds повторение мать учения, and it's interesting because the Soviet people were taught this saying as like one of the colloquialisms and used it all the time. I actually remember my mom saying it to me all the time when I was a kid. And looking, when you're a child, you think about it and you think like, oh, the more you the more you read the more you read your homework or something, the better you'll know it. But looking back at it now with the perspective that I have today, it's actually a very vile sort of thing that Russia has ingrained in the minds of its people, because certainly it can be taken as something positive, but I think there is quite an evil nature to it. Have there been, actually, here is an interesting one. So we've been talking about a lot of very sort of difficult concepts that have been simplified, right? But I guess one of the most famous hacker groups in the world that is known to probably every regular internet user is Anonymous. And they're perceived as sort of like the good hackers, right? They're kind of like the martyrs and the Robin Hoods of modern day dark web. How do these, like, what's the difference between a group like that, for instance, because they do also do attacks and they do also kind of pursue high security targets, right? And some of the well-known Russian hacker groups that are generally dubbed as evil.
It's an interesting question, and I'm going to try to thread this needle very carefully. The first thing that people need to know is that the Anonymous of 15 years ago is not the same Anonymous as now. I want to stress that. Several members of Anonymous went to prison. Some of them are still in prison. So the Anonymous name has been taken on a couple of different times. I just want to thread that little needle there. At the same time, there are hacker groups that follow a sort of a code. And I'm not saying good or ill about them, but they are there for the social justice of it all. They maybe work in a job or in a field that gives them the time to do these sorts of things. And they take their part-time to be social activists or social hacktivists, as they call themselves. And that is where they come from, where their good guy persona comes from. I would argue, just to be careful here, that does not make them what we refer to as white hats versus black hats. That just makes them sort of how best to say this? The Robin Hood example was kind of interesting, but the best way to say this is that white hats choose to do no harm at all, whereas the anonymous groups and these so-called Robin Hood groups, they are really going out on a limb to take matters into their own hands.
Yeah.
And I'm going to try not to judge on this, because sometimes they do come after financial institutions. Sometimes they are the bad guys that we're facing. Not nearly as often, say, as a Russian APT group or Chinese APT group that is trying to steal software or gain access to people's money. But sometimes they're trying to basically embarrass large companies or corporations.
Have there been any
Fair
attacks?
enough?
Oh, sorry.
Go
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I thought that you were.
No, that's all.
Oh.
But no, it was a good call.
Have there been any attacks on your financial institution, the one that you work at recently?
There are thousands of attacks a day.
Oh, wow.
The success of those attacks is measured in whether or not they gained information or whether or not they were able to do things. As a financial institution, the one I worked for most recently is required by law to notify people when their information is compromised. There's a very specific system written into law in the 1970s that they would have to follow. Luckily, that hasn't had to happen very much, because the idea is layered security works, and building up protections and detection systems before exfiltration is very, very important. Have there been attacks that have been more successful than others? Yes. Have there been attacks that have been darn close? Yes.
Have you had to update, rewrite, or sort of, I guess, evolve? Well, evolve always, code always evolves, but as in, like, have you had, I guess, situations in the near, sorry, let me just paraphrase that. Have there been so many attacks in the recent couple of years that the systems of cybersecurity and the code needed to be updated quite significantly?
Almost constantly. There are refactoring attempts. Refactoring is a good thing. Refactoring attempts into source code on almost a constant basis. There's also patches. I think people who use a cell phone have noticed that their cell phone operating system and that their cell phone applications seem to be patching far more often. This is because refactoring is becoming life. The number of patches that you may receive on average from an application went up from about 11 a year to about 173 a year. That's on the average application that you have on your cell phone, which means that you're seeing it every 1 or 2 days, right?
Ooh, not a good thing to realize, or not a good thing to think about. You know what I'm also curious about, and obviously that's a speculation, unless you've ever been a part of a black hat hacker group. But hackers are supposed to be anonymous, hence anonymous, right? But most of these like very big hack attacks, particular groups take responsibility for them, right? Why is it that they so want the world to know that they were responsible? Is this some sort of like an evil genius ego moment?
Okay. Not admitting to having ever been a part of a hacktivist group or this sort of thing, to my knowledge, that I want to go in there. It's part of the resume. These folks are attempting to get into higher paid positions, sometimes within their own government. If you are, for example, in Sandworm, inside of the Russian government, and you really want to get into Gamma then you're going to go and demonstrate some of these capabilities so that the hiring manager over there is going to go and want to say, yeah, we need that guy or that person or that woman over here in our group. So that's going to be one of those things. Likewise, if you get something that's really impressive, for example, we know some of the attackers in Salt Typhoon who wrote Ghost Spider. which is a type of like a backdoor tool, a piece of malware that they have written. We know who those people are. Those people receive more money, more protection in their society, and they also gain opportunities to go and travel and train in Russia, in Iran, and maybe even going to Dubai. That's like getting free vacations paid for so that you can go and do these things. The counterexample on the white hat stage is if you do really cool things and you write patents and do things that are protective oriented, maybe you get to go to Las Vegas and go to Black Hat and do a presentation and get a free vacation there. Or maybe you get to go to Cancun and do the same thing. From their perspective, it is still them doing a job and trying to work through their career. It's pretty disgusting what they do, but at the same time, that's a way to understand why they're doing it.
So it's essentially a portfolio.
Yep.
So this is, I mean, this is also a speculation, but I guess like this is a question inspired by a lot of spy thrillers, right? Are some of these hackers that are parts of these ridiculously notorious groups that do a lot of quite significant damage, right? Are they regular people that, I don't know, can be among us, our neighbor, or at or someone that you could be sitting next to at McDonald's or something like that? Or do these people normally exist in very separated environments?
That's an excellent question. I know for a fact that several of the groups, especially Russian groups, they have been counter-hacked. And before they started knowing how to do it, they left their cameras on. They had taken pictures on their personal phones. Their social media accounts had pictures of themselves, their girlfriends, their wives, et cetera, et cetera. So if they step into a country with extradition, they can be picked up. But these people might go to countries without extradition and just be normal, everyday people right there next to you in the McDonald's and this sort of thing. Some of those people have not been identified. Those people, too, might be the ones you might see along the side of the road or anywhere where you're going.
That's very interesting because I think most people's perception of hackers and spies is sort of conflated, right? Because we have American movies, we have Hollywood movies, and one of the reasons why I look the way that I look today is because I kind of wanted to play into the cliche of what your typical hacker chick in an American TV show would look like. I am missing sunglasses, and I am also missing like leather driver gloves and some Metallica t-shirt, but I think all black and heavy makeup is quite on brand for that. But we usually see two types of hackers. We see guys in suits that are nerds at a CIA facility, and then the second type of hackers that we see is what I just described and what I try to embody today. And I am assuming that these are, and both of these groups are quite separated from society, right? The hacker number 2 is usually someone who hangs out at raves and basements and no one would know. And hacker number 1 is just someone who never leaves their job in a CIA facility and, I don't know how they manage to write in romantic storylines for these people, because it does seem like they just live in their little skiff or wherever it is that they work. So it was very interesting to hear that these are just the people that you would never think, and they don't have to look a particular way or sound a particular way or seclude themselves and hang out in a particular environment. They have families that don't know what they do. And they could be sitting next to you at a restaurant, and you would never even know that. They kind of hold the world in a cyber threat lock once they log into their gaming computer or something. Also, this is a thing. So if you are, a hotshot hacker, like someone who works at Anonymous, what type of a setup would you have? Because I feel like, if like, let's say I was a hacker, right? And my inexistent husband, or if I was a wife to someone or a friend to someone who was, let's say, part of Anonymous, right? You have to have a pretty sophisticated system. So it's not like someone just comes home and you have like a tiny little laptop, right? Or am I completely off on that?
I think that you would find people run the gamut. Um, in the joke is cloud is somebody else's computers. A lot of times you'll see these days, the hacker might just be using a laptop, but he might also be using a large amount of cloud space that he is either paying for or he is stealing in some way, shape, or form, i.e., he's stealing the money to pay for it or whatnot. So thinking that you are in a room with a supercomputer, not necessarily necessary in a world in which you can rent a supercomputer for $1.29 an hour from AWS or Google in some way, shape, or form. $1.29 an hour is a little bit facetious. It's a lot more than that. But the idea is being able to rent the computers. The other thing is that most hacking is going to start out with some sort of phishing or smishing or social engineering attack of some kind. That may be ongoing. It may be a small part of what they're doing. That person may be hacking in Photoshop. They may be trying to make some sort of graphic that you're going to want to click on inside of an email campaign they're about to send. They may not have written a single line of code that day, but they may have spent a whole lot of time on ads.
Interesting. And then I guess the last question inspired by the movies is, we often see that these types of hackers, I mean, serious hackers, we're talking only about quite really serious hackers here, right? They usually get, for the jobs that they do, they'll get like a $200,000 deposit, right, for hacking into some system of some like institution. Do you think that these figures are represented accurately, and people who do these types of attacks and exist in these types of groups or work for like covert affairs in the government, do they get insane amounts of money paid to them for these services?
The most amount of money that people get typically is when they're in business for themselves and they have stolen a large amount of money from people or have some sort of system to do it. There are going to be hackers that are specifically given an incredibly large amount of money to do this, but that's going to be very few and far between. There are hackers for hire on a couple of different dark web websites and onion slices that I've seen that their going rate is $500 to $1,000 an hour, and they'll go minimum of 20 hours for their investigation type of thing, and they'll let you buy blocks of time. So $20,000, this sort of thing, that's more like the big game hunters, the extremely big people for the most part. I don't think it's the $200,000, $1 million sort of things that you hear in those sorts of deals. Hacking is done relatively inexpensively in a lot of cases. And it's very, very difficult to get up to the level that you'd be paid. Meanwhile, government workers in Russia are getting paid good amounts of money, but it's more like Western salaries as opposed to millions and millions of dollars for the vast majority of them.
Interesting. Well, I guess a lot of little boys just decided not to pursue coding anymore. Well, I guess the field, I'm sure the field is very saturated. Maybe in the 90s or the 80s, if you were, a big hacker, you could have made some crazy amounts of money just by knowing how to break into some padlocks, internet padlocks. But now I suppose there's so many hackers that most of the tasks, you're right, can be performed for relatively cheap, and a lot of them can also be performed by an algorithm that someone already pre-wrote and is just selling for $1.99, each time somebody uses it, which I suppose would be a very great business model. If cybersecurity, if cyber warfare right now is such a hot topic, do you think that Western governments are doing enough to sort of prevent attacks and repel them? And do you think that they're reacting adequately to everything that Russia is doing and taking all measures they could?
All measures that they could? No. but are they responding? I'd say for the most part, they're starting to do a pretty good job. I think that we have missed a couple of beats in treating the cyber attacks much more harshly and responding asymmetrically. China, Russia, North Korea, they don't live in open societies where they're going to really care about a cyber attack like we might care about if in the United States a major bank or financial institution was attacked or hacked, or the telecoms were knocked out. Attacks against Russia and these sorts of things are going to need to be something that is actually damages what the Russians care about or what the Chinese care about, vice versa. I think that that asymmetry is going to have to be addressed in the near future, because if they don't care, they're going to continue to escalate.
Yeah, the more digital the world gets, the more of these threats we're going to be facing, because arguably, you know, most of the warfare today is not done on the battlefield. Most of the warfare today is done behind the curtain, and it's done through computers. So I'm very curious, I guess, to conclude our conversation, which was so enlightening today. What are the things that we as individuals can do to protect ourselves for the future of these growing threats? And what can we as, I guess, governments and major institutions can do to further our cybersecurity?
I know this is going to sound incredibly weird with all the pessimistic things that I've been saying here, but one of them is to be optimistic. If you can build walls for yourself that protect your money and the money of your family and your friends and this sort of thing, and you can build out a protective shell for yourself, and you can limit the amount of exposure when these hacks happen, you can just kind of smile to yourself and say, I am prepared for this, and I have protected myself from this. If you can identify the phishing emails or the SMS messages here, and you can appropriately delete them and warn others about them, and be informed and share your information with others to help them, and become a resource for those people in your life or family, then you can do an optimistic thing that can be a positive force in moving forward in making these things useless. If they didn't work, they wouldn't try them. So you can actually see in your daily life as they disappear, that means they stopped working. So you can work towards that and work with family and friends and try to make sure they know, hey, I got this. Did you get one of these? I just want to make sure you know this is dangerous. And this is what they're trying to do. They're looking for low-hanging fruit. Please don't feed them, type of things. If you can do those efforts and be optimistic about it and open to it and try to educate friends, family, that is a huge, huge movement towards making their tools fail.
And then on an institutional level, what do you think governments and large corporations could be doing better in order to protect themselves?
Hire a good mixture of optimists and pessimists, put them in the room, make them grind against each other to provide protection and risk, have their arguments go forward, and try very hard to publish your failures and successes so that others can learn from them. I can't stress enough, everybody seems to want to hide the failures. They need to bring those to the front. They need to talk about them. They need to be discussed at high levels. And then this security needs to be shared. And everyone needs to say, hey, we're not going to let the same trick work against anyone else in the industry, in the world. We're going to close those doors. So these guys have to invent something new every single time they attack us, without exception. We're going to make the defenses multi-layer and multiple depths. So even when they do get an attack in, it's not going to penetrate all the way through all of our armor. And we're going to layer this up, and we're going to weather these storms and these typhoons, as they were, and we're going to make it so that they cannot succeed.
You know, for as much as we talked today about all of the dangers of cybersecurity, you have a very oddly calming ability at the end of this to tell us all that everything is going to be okay. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for joining me today and telling us a bit about your world and I guess the world that all of us are living in, whether we know it or not, and whether we want it or not, because the internet has taken over our lives, and so have cyber criminals. So thank you very much for this super enlightening conversation, and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you. This was awesome. I really appreciate it.
See you next time, Jason, hopefully, and maybe in a couple of years, we can talk about all of the advancements in cybersecurity and how we repelled Russia, and all of their hackers now live somewhere on an island and retired.
There we go. Thank you so much, Julia. All right.
Thank you. Well, I hope this conversation was interesting to you, and I hope that my outfit today screamed, "Hi, I'm trying to look like a typical hacker chick from every American movie. I'm dressed for the part." Because, sometimes you just need a bit of an atmosphere. Anyways, if you enjoyed this conversation and you would like to hear more like it in the future, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Also, like this video and send it to a friend, because, well, at least they gotta check out my makeup today. And, of course, do leave your questions, suggestions, constructive criticism, thoughts, comments, anything under this video, because I read all of them and they help me tailor next conversations to you. See you next time.